My hypothesis for this project was to examine whether or not migrants traveled to the United States in order to create ventures. To examine this, I looked at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is a composite index that is made up of 30 large corporations in the United States, which is generally considered to be an adequate measure of the state of the U.S. economy. So I was going to look at if these companies were created by migrants, and if so, these are the companies distributing products to the countries that the migrants come from. In other words, so the migrants simply come to the United States to create businesses that they didn't have opportunities to do so in their own country. As stated in my project proposal, the medium in which my project will take will include illustrations which I took pictures of and put into a video format, and I'm overlaying my voice to that video, and I'll upload that to YouTube. This concept for a project was of particular interest to me because this project is supposed to relate to our major, and my major is entrepreneurship and emerging enterprises in the Whitman School. So I thought hearing about entrepreneurial stories and how ventures are created was particularly fascinating. Today we live in a more interconnected, globalized world than ever before. Because of this, it's generally considered to be easier to start a company and find the resources you need to start said company. However, due to various political and socioeconomic reasons, many people in this world cannot gain access to the resources they need to start ventures, which is why they travel to the United States, a place that has lots of resources and is a hub for global connectingness. The United States, like many countries, though, requires quotas for the number of immigrants they're willing to accept annually. With a limited capacity for the number of people, foreign people that can enter the country, there's a lot of competition to be able to gain access, which is why illegal immigration is such a big issue. In Danny Roderick's book, The Globalization Paradox, Roderick suggests that 5-year visas are extended to immigrants who want to come to the United States, and those visas, after they expire, the immigrants will return home, and a new set of immigrants from that country will come to the United States to have a 5-year visa. To make sure that the immigrants actually return to their country of origin, the home country for them needs to make sure they come back, or else the United States will reduce the number of people that can come to the United States, thereby reducing the amount of education these immigrants will bring back to their home country, the amount of income they will bring back, and it will generally defeat the purpose of coming in the first place. This is not Roderick's argument, but it is an argument by economists that say immigration, whether illegal or not, has a negative effect economically on American citizens because of competition with wages. In my research, there's nothing that says immigrants are either good or bad for this. Surprisingly, though, as I will go into in further detail in a little bit, immigrants who are residents of the United States annually create 680 businesses for every 100,000 residents as compared to 280 for the same amount for non-immigrants. As I stated earlier, to research my hypothesis, I analyzed the Dow Jones Industrial Average. I pulled up the 30 companies listed in the Dow Jones, and to my surprise, there was a great contradiction to my hypothesis. I was expecting to see that many of the companies, especially since the United States is a nation founded on immigrants, many of the companies would be founded by immigrants. Only 4 of the companies in the Dow Jones Industrial Average currently are founded by immigrants, and only 1 of the 30 companies is founded outside of the United States. And a year after its first beginning operations, it moved to the United States. The average for the year of beginning for operations for the 30 companies listing on the average currently is 1900. This is very surprising because it means that not only are these companies old, but they've been established for a very long time, which means they've continued to grow constantly, and there hasn't really been room for immigrants to enter the Dow Jones Industrial Average. I measured the percent growth of these companies, and each was in the thousands since their time first being listed on the Dow Jones. So already with this research, it can be determined that my hypothesis is null about immigrants being a large factor in the Dow Jones. As I said previously, the Dow Jones is considered a good measurement for the U.S. economy and the global economy. But since immigrants, as I also said, per capita, meaning the population of immigrants versus the population of American citizens, in some cities, those immigrants are contributing more to the economy. This made me ask another question, which is, if these immigrants are contributing so much to the health of the U.S. economy, how is it that their companies are not listed on the Dow Jones Industrial Average? Keep in mind they may be listed in the S&P 500, but the Dow Jones is also considered, like the S&P, to be a composite measurement of the U.S. economy. It's possible that immigrants just simply haven't been here long enough, like the companies listed on the Dow Jones have, for them to become established enough to become well known and successful like the companies in the Dow Jones. I thought of another theory, and I began to think that it's possible that immigrants are creating these great businesses, startup ventures, when they come to the United States, and that these companies are being acquired by the larger companies listed on the Dow Jones. How else would it be possible for the Dow Jones to consistently grow greater and greater? My research also told me, though, that many of the firms created by immigrants, first and second generation immigrants, are usually small to mid-sized firms. They're usually not large firms, as immigrants usually tend to hover around the middle class. Typically, the types of companies that Dow Jones firms like to acquire, and they acquire very often to continue their growth, are small to mid-cap firms. Otherwise, it's not economically feasible to purchase these huge companies that they'd be paying literally billions of dollars for. I went to Edgar Online, which is the site where all the SEC filings are for publicly traded companies, and unfortunately it was impossible to determine exactly how many companies were being acquired by these different firms, just because the acquisitions are happening so often and in such a large quantity. But while that information was difficult to uncover, I think it became very clear to me that large American corporations like those listed on the Dow Jones and S&P single-handedly would not be able to come up with the innovative products consistently that they come up with without mergers and acquisitions occurring. While there isn't information specifically on the nationality of the founders of the firms that are being acquired, it's important to consider that we live in a globalized world, an extremely interconnected world. With the advent of the internet, people thousands of miles apart can teach each other wirelessly things as simple as how to build a bicycle, or even as complex as open source programming to continually improve upon difficult programming languages. This is why I think it is theoretically possible that the same is occurring for the companies in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. There is constantly innovation that's occurring within these companies, and it's likely impossible that even though they're hiring very smart people, that always they can come up with the best ideas just with the people that they have in their firm. Now, this might be slightly opinionated, but as I said, we live in a highly interconnected world, and since this world has become interconnected, technology, not only technology, every kind of industry has improved gigantically since the world has become more interconnected. We talked about this in great depth about free trade and how easy it is to move products from one nation to another. We also talked about, though, in class how various countries have greater access to certain resources, such as financial resources and education, and that these resources can make one country more skilled at producing goods than another. The Gerber textbook from class, International Economics, explains the idea of comparative advantage. However, as is explained in the Heschel-Lin model of comparative advantage, not every country is best at just one thing. That's why trade happens. Trade happens because each country can benefit from the services that each country offers to one another, yet some countries have multiple services they're good at. In the picture that's on the screen now, I drew a businessman pointing at a banana tree and a cow. It's supposed to illustrate that corporate America is pointing at who is delegating, who's going to be making bananas, and what country is going to be raising cattle. While crude in nature, it should also represent a sort of paradigm because the global economy is not black and white with one country producing one resource and another country producing another. There's great diversity, which is why the theory that the U.S., although the most educated and powerful nation in the world, is not always going to be the most educated and powerful at creating a new idea. It could be the country that produces cattle. A person that tends to cows in that country may have realized something that no person in America ever would have realized about cow production and how to make the most amount of milk possible from one cow. While that does represent a specialization, the idea that one country delegates that it will hold the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the 30 greatest companies in the world, hypothetically, and another country will be a country of, not that this is bad, but a country of cow farmers or banana growers, isn't exactly correct. For my own edification during my research, I was reading about the history of the Industrial Revolution, and in fact, Danny Roderick talks about this in his book. When the Industrial Revolution happened, most countries were equal economically. And then when it did happen, the countries that really industrialized not only grew, but the countries that didn't industrialize went backwards. These countries were so outmatched by the countries that did industrialize, there was no real reason to trade with them because they weren't producing something as valuable. Not only did they not have a comparative advantage, but their absolute advantage was just non-existent. So the cow herder in, say, hypothetically Nigeria, that discovered the best way in the world to get the most amount of milk from a cow without doing genetic engineering, had no way of turning this idea into a possible successful business. Nigeria is a country that's greatly based in tradition, so local farmers wouldn't adapt his method or purchase his ideas. So the best thing he could come up with was travel to the United States of America, where any idea could become successful. The Nigerian farmer travels to the United States and partners with a local grocery store, and his cattle become the best-selling milk brand in the region. So successful that the DuPont chemical company in the area, who is trying to raise awareness about sustainability for chemicals and food, decides to sponsor this company. In fact, they decide to acquire the company after the sponsorship goes so well. Although slightly overdrawn as an example, it illustrates how a globalized, interconnected world can create a venture. 100 years ago, that same man would not only not have been able to leave his country, but if he was, he'd have to travel on a boat, probably infested with typhus or some other disease, and if he made it to America, he'd have to differentiate himself without the use of an internet or partnering with a local chain, likely because they need to fend for themselves in the tough markets. A similar analogy could be adapted to a U.S. business person who's investing in oil commodities. In the image I drew below, see in the lower right-hand corner, oil fountain, let's just say a BP oil fountain off the coast of the Gulf. That news of its eruption flowing with oil ends up going to a news person, which is the middle drawing, which ends up getting relayed to a stock investor in the upper left-hand corner. Well, that stock investor can invest billions of dollars, let's say, in that oil commodity because of this information driving the price of oil all around the world. And they could drive the price of oil all around the world without even getting up from their home computer because the world is so interconnected now. Just with the click of a button, they could change the price of oil from $99 to $109. While this is not exactly the same as the example with the Nigerian farmer, it's supposed to demonstrate just exactly how much of an impact an interconnected world of free trade, in this case financial free trade, how much it can affect everyone. And effects are a very important idea to consider because of externalities. An externality is something that is affecting somebody or something several degrees down the road from the actual event itself. So using the example of DuPont Chemical Company again, let's say in the drawing below that's a picture of Walter White. from Breaking Bad. Let's say he gets his chemicals from DuPont Chemical Company. One of the chemicals, hypothetically, is made of a calcium extract from the cow grown by the Nigerian farmer who works for DuPont. This demonstrates both a positive and negative externality because the farmer is trying to make a positive externality by not only making money but also contributing a healthier source of milk to the public, while the negative externality is, of course, addicting people to drugs. Although not strictly an example of a migrant's innovative idea in a business, this demonstrates the concept of an externality, which is incredibly important for a migrant or any person who is trying to create a business. To tie this all together, companies in the Dow Jones Industrial Average that monopolize their given industry, as I said previously, simply cannot, no matter how many resources they have within their own company, come up with time and time again the innovative products that they do without some foreign help. The migrant that creates a business that is absorbed by one of these conglomerates is actually having a positive externality, hopefully a positive externality, on the people that the products that are branded with these conglomerates' names are being sold to. Hypothetically, in the picture below, that's supposed to be the Facebook cover page when you log on to the website, Mark Zuckerberg beneath it. Let's say hypothetically that some of the best ideas for Facebook came from a migrant. Well, let's say using the advent of the internet to use like open source programming, as I referenced earlier. Well, that nameless person, who quite possibly did not have the education and financial resources that were given to many of their counterparts in the United States working on Facebook, managed to come up with several original components of the program that we use all the time, yet we'll never know their name. They'll be faceless to us, and they, in all likelihood, weren't paid a tremendous amount of money for their possibly billion-dollar contribution. Yet their product is being distributed all over the world, including to the home country that they created the product in, where they couldn't have pitched it in that country themselves. While maybe not morally correct, it seems time and again, at least in my research and other people I've spoken to about this project, the world, through international trade, in this case international trade of ideas, connects us all. And that really is what international ideation is. It's the economy of ideas across international boundaries. 13% of the American population is made up of immigrants, yet 28% of small business growth is done annually by this 13%. Currently, 40% of tech firms in Silicon Valley are run by immigrants. The Kauffman Foundation, the organization responsible for publishing the Global Entrepreneurship Development Index, shows that foreigners are better at developing tech startups and science startups than Americans are. Pursuant to my theory from my research, it's likely that many of these firms are being acquired by the large firms in the Dow Jones. The exact economic contribution of immigrants, whether legal or illegal in the United States, is difficult to measure. And because it's difficult to measure, my hypothesis was very difficult to prove. However, my hypothesis that migrants contributed greatly to the Dow Jones, I think, is true.